Welcome to DentonRadio.com, powered in part by Classic of Denton.
This place anywhere else if you tried. It is a work of art in itself. Also, to the staff of Dan Silverleaf, thank you so much. Brent Best, hairiest guy in the room, thank you so much. Tip your bartenders handsomely and hit the bar as much as you want. This is going to be pretty informal. Thank you to Jake for running video. He's not even here, but thank you, Jake, anyways. Last but not least, actually, Randy Skinner, thank you for showing up and helping out, running our social media. You're awesome. Thank you very much. Last but not least, thank you guys for showing up, because this is how democracy works. You show up, you get engaged, you listen to the candidates, you boil down what they're saying, and you vote for the person who you think represents you the best. And that doesn't work without you guys. So thank you so much for showing up. Tonight's debate, like I said, it is hosted by We Didn't Do It and politicallydenton.com. You can check it out on Facebook and Twitter. Subscribe to the podcast on itunes.com. If that's a website, that should be a website. We have t-shirts for sale. We Didn't Do It t-shirts. The first time they've ever been on sale in public. $20 a piece. We take all sorts of payment. There we go. She's holding them up right there. Yeah, those are good-looking t-shirts, aren't they? So this is a unique forum for several reasons, and I have 15 points I'd like to make about how unique this is. Point number one, just kidding, I have like 3 or 4. Both We Didn't Do It and Politically Denton were started on the premise that a better conversation is what makes us better people and what makes our community better and what makes our lives better. And that's why we started it. We Didn't Do It was founded on the premise of better conversations about food and art and culture and music. Politically Denton was founded on the basis that the politics conversation could be better. And we're not a single issue forum. If you've been to the firefighters forum, guess what type of questions they ask? Stuff about firefighters. We're not a special interest group by any means, except that we live in Denton and we care deeply about our city. The format's going to be very interesting as well. We're not going to go down and just ask the same question from every candidate and everyone gives the same answer or a different version of the same answer. We've dug through video, websites, campaign literature, social media. We've dug deep into who these people are and what they are putting out there as far as their campaign goes. And we're going to ask pretty pointed questions about who they are, and that we think that will give you a better idea of who you will be voting for starting April 23rd. Like I said, April 23rd is early voting. Election day is May 5th. Let me give you some stats about voting. There are 57,524 registered voters in the city of Denton, out of a population of 133,000 roughly. Only 10,421 of them have voted in any one of the last 4 municipal elections. That's 18% of just people who might wake up that day and decide to vote. So 18% of the population is voting for the leaders of our city. Just think about that. Think about that. Think about that number. Anyways, much like 1987's WrestleMania 3, we do not know how this is going to turn out. Is Andre the Giant going to get beat? I don't know. But it's a better conversation. So much like WrestleMania 3, we have this debate. Anyways, please go vote. April 23rd is the early voting. Election day is May 5th. We're having a watch party on the rooftop of LSA May 5th. Everyone's invited. Please go vote, and please publicly shame your friends who don't. And now I'm going to introduce the candidates real quick, and we will be off. Place 5, Bud Vulcan. Jody Vickers-Nance. Deb Armentor. Aaron Fuzzy Newquist. Chris Watts. Neil Durant. And they are Mayor's Race. Sorry, I didn't include that. In place 6, we have Frank Dudowitz and Paul Meltzer. Thank you very much. I'm going to start timing, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Glenn. Welcome, everyone. We're going to start off. For the most part, each candidate's going to get a chance to answer their question in a 2-minute time frame. If we change that up, we'll let them know and let you all know. Can everyone see the screen here?
We can now.
Can now. Good. Glenn will get that queued up. But this is fun, right? This is how politics was meant to be dealt with. In a bar. With adult beverages in hand. For most of us, it mellows us out. For some of you, it probably makes you more angry. So if that's you, please be moderate tonight. We are in a more relaxed, comfortable environment, and we're not going to get too strict on people being too rambunctious, but we do want you to be respectful of all the candidates up there. These people are putting themselves out into a position for public interrogation, and they're doing it because they love this city and they want to serve the city, so please give them the respect due what they've done. So we're going to start off with the mayoral race here, and we drew places to see who goes first in this first question, as well as the reverse will happen when we have closing statements. In this case, Neil Durant gets to go first to answer the first question, and here it is. You may have seen Jeff Bezos is coming to Dallas this week, continuing to fuel speculation of the greater Dallas area as a possible site for Amazon's HQ2, their second headquarters. Should Denton pursue this opportunity? And if so, what should our city be willing to give in terms of economic incentives to make it happen?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for having this little forum here this evening. I must say it is one of the more unique venues I've ever dealt with. But, that's why I was saying I was noticing, are we going to get drinks at halftime or something like that?
Just let us know. Plenty of people will buy you a drink.
But several questions you raised there. First of all, the real issue is what is economic development here? Should we go for a business such as Amazon too? Well, I think that would depend on what kind of a plan you have for our city. There's two sides to every coin, two sides to every argument. Amazon too is a business that, although large and would bring lots of employees, doesn't pay, is warehousing. And as a rule, that doesn't pay very high level wages. So it would depend on what we have. But the real problem with attracting Amazon to or other businesses of equally large, like Toyota that came to Plano, is the fact that we lack the infrastructure and the planning for that type of infrastructure necessary to attract the kind of businesses that we want. But first, we have to decide what that is. And that is a much, much longer discussion than I would ever be able to compress into the 30 seconds that I have left. So let's just say for right now, it depends on what we're looking for and what we're trying to get. And also it depends on what your vision and where you think this city needs to go. I think we could go a lot higher and do a lot better. We have two of the greatest universities in the state of Texas here in Denton, and those universities, if with proper cooperation between our city and the university foundations, could actually help and feed and generate a tremendous economy, far better than anything that they're proposing with an Amazon too.
Thank you very much. Mr. Watts.
Same question?
Same question.
Well, the proposal for HQ2 is not warehousing. It was a second corporate headquarters. Over a 10-year period, it would be 50,000 jobs. And they're not warehousing jobs. They would be executive jobs. They would be middle management jobs. They would be a second headquarters for what they have up in Seattle. The economic development impact of that, as far as just the value that they would bring in their construction upon build-out, is in the billions of dollars. In fact, I think it was estimated it would almost be double what our current assessed value, total assessed value is right now. Of course, Denton, the Regional Chamber of Commerce in Dallas, did submit a regional proposal for HQ. They asked people to submit proposals. They're in the stage now of limiting that and narrowing that down. What would Denton be willing to do? I think that's a discussion that is warranted. There's not much information about what they're asking for. There's not much information about what they're going to bring except for their statistics as far as replicating their headquarters currently in Seattle. So economic development is an important question. It's an important question that we have a strategic plan for. It's an important question that we have to continually look at each manufacturing company or headquarter or business that's coming in to ask for economic development incentives. What are you bringing to the community? What are you going to bring to our community? That is a question that we do on a case-by-case basis. We have a general policy, but one thing that you have to understand, Denton does not have an economic development corporation, which most of the cities in this area do, which means a portion of their sales tax goes into an economic development fund to use to attract companies. Take Toyota, for instance. Toyota, Plano paid $5 million to get Toyota into that corridor, which when you look at their value, it's considerably large, and it's also impacted the housing here. So it's a case-by-case analysis on economic development.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to place 5 here on everyone's left. The first question that's going to start with Jody Vickers-Nance. During the campaign, you have no doubt heard from many voters. What's the number one issue you have heard from voters, and what is your plan to address that issue once in office?
Oh, goodness. I hate going first. Probably the number one concern that I've heard from people is infrastructure, the roads. That's a big concern for people, that they're not being fixed quick enough, that they're under construction for a long period of time. And so I think that's certainly a concern because people just want to get to their homes in a timely manner. And so, that's the first major concern I hear of. But then the second major concern I hear of is about the homeless population and what we're going to do in that instance with that vulnerable population. And obviously we need to look at the homeless initiatives, look at getting more beds for the nighttime, find something to do, like a day center for them. Maybe look at what's come out of Austin with the social impact bonds, where private investors invest in services, and then if they meet certain metrics, then the government will pitch in and help with that. So there's a lot of different issues with that to look at because that is one of our most vulnerable populations, and so many of them are also mentally ill as well, and we don't have those services. So that's just kind of what I've heard from people.
Thank you. Next is Deb Armentor.
Can I stand up?
You may.
Okay.
You're on stage. You can do whatever you want.
For me, walking around citywide, knocking on doors, the 3 most prevalent things I've been hearing, especially in the past 3 days, are roads, number 1, codes, number 2, specifically code enforcement, and 3, over the last few days, these red light cameras, which have already been on everybody's mind, but now with this latest scandal, people are really asking, when are these red light cameras going to finally go? So those are the 3 issues for me. As many of you know, I serve on the Public Utility Board. I'm an English professor at UNT. I'm a mom. My kids are right there, over there. And I'm a volunteer on a number of different issues benefiting the homeless in our community. I'm running on a platform for lower cost of living, higher quality of life, and better government. And it just so happens that these 3 issues that I've been hearing most from these past 3 days are the red light cameras specifically the past 3 days, but roads and codes from the very beginning. These 3 issues apply to all of these concerns. As many of you know, I ran once before. This was my second time. Last time I came in second in a highly competitive 5-way race against an incumbent. This time I'm in it to win it, not for me, but for you guys. I am 100% grassroots. I'm an advocate. I stick my neck out there to take risks for myself so that y'all won't be taking risks with your tax dollars or ratepayers' money. I want to keep, make DME rates lower, make you feel like this really is your public utility. I want to make you feel served by your government, and I'm here to serve you. Thanks.
Thank you. Aaron Fuzzy Newquist, same question to you.
All right. Thank you for that. First, I want to thank Dan. We didn't do it. Politically, Denton. Especially y'all for taking time out of your night to come out and see us. And my wife, Jessie. So, of course, roads is probably the most prevalent issue that we get. And you didn't start my timer. There you go. I'll give it a couple seconds. I'm fair. So obviously roads is a big topic of discussion, right? So our issue with roads not only has to do with just getting them done, but it has a lot to do with being accountable. It has to do with being accountable to the projects that the people authorize and ask us to do. We've got to come through on those sorts of things. We have to expect to be held to the standard that we're given. People set expectations and we have to meet them. Furthermore, it's a financial issue. I've been in finance and banking for almost 20 years. I understand not only complex financial matters and budgets, but also project management and how large, complex projects with a lot of different stakeholders get moved down the line. So between the practical aspect of doing the things that we're supposed to do as public servants and doing the things we're supposed to do as good financial stewards, that's how our roads, and furthermore our sidewalks, bikes and trails and things like that need to get done are going to get done. Secondarily, of course, we talk about housing affordability. We talk about, I think that if you look statistically, Denton is not immune to this problem we're having where, yes, the cost of housing is going up extremely quickly, but wages aren't keeping up. We've got to attract higher paying jobs to Denton. If that means some sort of regional approach that utilizes some of our best assets like our utility and our airport in order to get into some sort of collaborative to try to bring Amazon here because they are going to have 50,000 jobs, mostly white collar, I'm all for it because that's also going to bring up our values and going to take the tax burden off of our people. All right? And finally, when it comes right down to it, guys, financial responsibility, ethics, and being transparent and accountable. I'm all about it.
Thank you very much. All right, finally, Bud Voken, same question. Number one issue you're hearing from voters?
Number one issue is infrastructure, particularly roads, but also other items. I'm a civil engineer. I've been a civil engineer for 38 years. I understand infrastructure project management. I've also worked for the city of Denton for 14 years. I know the background and the wherewithals of how it works within Denton. I know the filters that different things go through to get up to the city manager and then to the city council. I understand that, both infrastructure and the way things work. Things work, we need to deal with the roads. We need to get from here to there faster and quicker. There's too much congestion. We see that right now on Teasley. We saw it on the Loop. There's a lot of other streets in the city that just too congested for the development that's happened on the road and near the road where the congestion is. We need to continue the bike trails. We need to have ADA compliance with the city. There's a lot of issues out there with the handicapped. And then the second item would be that we've heard the most about are those who are homeless. We need to get something going with the homeless. We have a good program in Denton. They are coming to us because we help them. We need to bring this to the county and to other cities so that they can also help and therefore distribute the homeless throughout. We need to get the churches involved more. They are good now by themselves, but we need to consolidate all of them. There's a lot of good churches out there that are doing feeding and providing places for the homeless, but they're doing it independent of each other. And so we need to have more coordination. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on to place 6. Frank Dudowitz is going to have the first answer to this question, and that is, what specific plans do you have to make our city more friendly for pedestrians and bicyclists?
Well, first of all, thank you guys, Denton Do It, for hosting this, and I have a horn in my ear coming through. It's not unusual. If I understand the question, what's going to make Denton more friendly to bicyclists?
So pedestrians and bicyclists, what specific plans do you have?
First of all, I'm in favor of doing whatever we can to increase our bike lanes. And one of the things I thought about when I was driving here, I came down Mingo, and there were bicyclists on that road, and that road needs to be bicyclist friendly. And what I'm proposing and thinking about is actually widening that, because we have conduits, we have ditches there that we need to fill in and put a bicycle path and a pedestrian path there. I think we need to look at all the actions that we have and all the paths that people take to and from work, to entertainment venues, to shopping, to consider what we need to do in those areas. But it can be, as somebody said here, you look at both sides, so there are not unintended consequences with vehicular traffic that may be impeded or vice versa. So we need to take a look at everything we can do to encourage this, and I think we're doing a good job, but more can be done. And I look like we have about 30 seconds here. The last thing here is that I know we have enough people that are interested in this area, and we need to listen to them. I think in the past, what we've seen is things being done, but no one's getting citizens' input and say, hey, is that the right place to put a bicycle path? Oh, we need one over here. We have sidewalks that are too narrow. Let's widen that sidewalk. We need citizens' input in all these areas, and I think that's going to be the most critical thing that we can do and that I can bring to City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Meltzer, same question to you.
I think it starts with having a policy that supports walkable neighborhoods, allowing for retail to be clustered so that people can do more near where they live. And then I think there's a need for small area plans, like actually smaller than the Oak Gateway Advisory Committee that I'm chairing, but that's where members of the community and various stakeholders come together to go through and pressure test where exactly are the needs, and then bring in citizen input. There's specifically with regard to bike lanes, I think we ought to move forward from just the stripe in the road, which is great, and it's something we never had before, but to protected bike lanes so that people really feel safe going from location to location, and also bike lanes that are off-road, that are, for instance, some of you have heard me talk about this before, there's a plan that's been designed but not yet funded to put the fourth tributary of Pecan Creek south of the square into box culvert so that it's covered, and that can be green space with bike trail and walking paths that connect to other nearby neighborhoods, and that becomes a safe place that you can bike where you're not worried about 18-wheelers coming along beside you. I think there's a lot of opportunity in that direction. So safer bike lanes and off-road bike lanes connecting urban areas with green spaces. I think it's part of taking a look at Denton to see how can we, as we grow, become better, not just bigger. It's something you'll hear me say a lot. And I think making it just more bikeable and walkable makes it more livable. So even as we grow, we can do that.
Thank you very much. So now we're going to head back to the mayoral race, and Chris Watts will be able to answer this question first.
Did you say I will or will not be able to?
We'll let the audience be the judge of that. So there's a lot of talk in our community about affordable housing. And there's a lot of mystery to some folks about kind of what causes that. Is it a supply and demand issue? Is it some other sort of thing that the city can just dictate more affordable houses? So this question is this: what are the causes of a shortage in affordable housing? And what steps can we take this year to improve the situation?
What are the causes and what are the steps?
Yep.
Well, I think most of the cause is market value. I mean, it's supply and demand. It's the marketplace. As Denton continues to grow, as the two universities continue to grow, people want to maximize their investment. They want to maximize their rate of return. So as more demand is increased for rental properties, prices go up because that's what they can get. What are the steps that we can do? The city council has been taking those steps over the last couple of years. They've partnered with developers to come in and build affordable housing apartment communities. And affordable housing means that you are able to rent it if you're like 60% or 50% below the median income, then your rent is already determined what it should be for 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and the like. So we need to make sure that we enter into good partnerships with that. But I will tell you, when you look at affordable housing properties that are being built right now, and you look at the rents that they are asking, it still is a stretch. I mean, when you're talking about 2 bedroom, 2 bath units for $850, $900 to $1,000, I don't know if I really would call that necessarily affordable. So we have, and that's a different issue than the homelessness issue. So the best way that we can do is, number one, make sure that we're operating efficiently at the city so your tax rate is low, so that people can come in, they're not overburdened with taxes. But we also have to take the steps to incentivize people to come in, build affordable housing that is truly affordable, that it's not just $900 a month or $1,000 a month, because if you're making $40,000 a year, which is average teacher salary in Denton, $40,000 to $50,000 a year, it's going to be very difficult to afford $1,000 to $1,200 a month apartment. If you want a house, that's a whole different question. So we're taking steps and entering into partnerships with affordable housing developers. I think we can do more by finding ways to help drop the cost for those developers and then pass those costs in savings onto the renters and the tenants.
Thank you. Mr. Durant.
Well, first of all, housing is an issue and function of city planning. We have had city planning, we've had several plans for our city, and they always seem to wind up on the shelf gathering dust. And with regard specifically to affordable housing, the first thing we need to do is address the issue of homelessness. By addressing that issue first, we raise the standard and level for all people. Second area, and that is that in our planning, we should allow for planning not by growth by bands, but by nodes. If you allow growth by nodes, then you set out areas in which you can have multiple levels of housing for different types of housing, multiple family, single apartments, doubles, that kind of thing. Also, and I think most importantly, is that we need to work on raising the economy of our city. I saw a newspaper article in the Record Chronicle, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, that said that you can't live in Denton unless you're making $16 to $18 an hour. Well, when minimum wage is $7.25, you're never going to make it. And with salaries being what they are, in some areas, we're actually placing ourselves out of a market to bring people in. So it is a function of planning for which you have to make plans not only 4 or 5 or 10 years in the future, but 20, okay? The third thing I think that is most important is what they call intermodal interconnectivity, okay? And what it means is basically is that if the only way that you can get around Denton is in a car, and as Mr. Meltzer was mentioning just a moment ago, there's a white stripe for a bike lane, then that makes cost for some people almost prohibitive. They can't get to work because they don't have a car that will get them there or back. We have begun some intermodal transportation, but that needs to be completed and also connected up with the rest of the region in this area.
Time.
So,
Thank
I
you.
am out of time.
Yes,
Sorry,
thank you very much. We're going to move over to place 5, and the first one who gets to answer this question is Deb Armentor. We have created a city. The citizens have created a city that young people want to stay in. Many college students come about to go to the universities here in Denton and want to stick around, but not a lot of places for them to be employed after they graduate from college. Jobs, the workplace, the types of businesses, and what drives our economy is rapidly changing. What can Denton be doing now specifically to situate our city to take advantage of and thrive in a 21st century economy?
Well, thank you. And that's an excellent issue. And as a college professor, I see this all the time. I see students, not just UNT students, my institution, TWU and NCTC, fall in love with the city and not be able to stay here. I also see from the point when they start applying for jobs, they find that the kind of jobs they're applying for are mostly not in the city. So they begin the sad process of saying goodbye to the city that they love at the application stage. I think a couple of things can be done from the city level. Number one, the issue of housing affordability is actually directly related to this because graduating seniors, they've got loans, they've got a lot of debt, and they're not just looking at how much they're going to be making, but cost of living. So we need to keep that in mind. Number two, I always ask with questions like this, when there's a problem, I think not only what can we do to make things better, but are we doing anything as a city right now that actually makes things worse? And I think in the case of high-paying jobs, one thing we're doing right now that's making it worse that we can stop is having prohibitive permitting. Every election year, people talk about we've got to streamline our permitting to make it easier for homegrown businesses to take root here in Denton and for big businesses that'll be beneficial to our quality of life. And I believe only those ones that are beneficial to our quality of life are the ones that we want to come in. We have a permitting where we have, instead of having, say, 5 different related issues on a single permit, which I think is the way it should be, we have separate permits which cost a lot more, and we're also depending on companies building here in Denton to pay for our infrastructure.
Thank you very much.
I think the city should pay for it. Thanks.
Next, Fuzzy.
Let's get this in. This is an important question. I don't know how many of y'all know this, but about 30,000 people a day leave Denton to work for a number of different reasons. Maybe it's because they can find better wages somewhere else, or maybe that the type of work that they do or what they're particularly skilled in doesn't exist here. I find myself to be particularly blessed to be able to live and work in the same city, and I want all of you and the folks I haven't even met yet to experience the same thing. Well, how do we do that? We got to be able to match up job skills with what our employers are looking for. Just one little point off the cuff. Did you know the closest Lincoln Tech is 40 miles away from here? So if you want to learn welding, plumbing, you want to learn to be an electrician or do robotics, all things that are in extremely high demand right now, you can't. How are you going to get there? It's not efficient. It's not effective to get there, to get that education. I'd like to see us put together a concerted effort, a very considerately thought out effort to talk about bringing real job skills training to Denton, to work from the bottom up, to bring wages up, to help with our housing affordability problem, right? We're going to help folks get on their feet. And if that means we got to try to attract somebody up here to put a school into an outlet mall that's been empty for as long as I've known it, or somewhere else that we can develop out and create new taxable property, hey, let's talk about it. Because all ideas need to be on the table, because 30,000 people don't need to be getting in their cars and leaving here every day. They should be able to stay, and they should be able to do it and sustain themselves.
Thank you. Bud Voken. Bud, same question to you.
The big thing is not only affordable housing, but you need to have the jobs here. We need to bring in the jobs. And we have plenty of jobs here, but what kind are they? They're university, they're masters and PhDs. There's tech. There's very few tech. A lot of it's services. UNT and TWU generate a lot of service-type jobs. Pizza and other such venues. And then there's hospitals. We're talking about doctors and nurses. UNT generates a lot of undergraduate degrees, a lot of master's degrees, and they got a few PhDs, and they have to go somewhere else because unless they stay with the university or they're a doctor or a nurse, they have to go elsewhere. So we need to bring in, the city needs to zone certain areas for high-tech areas. We already have the North Campus for UNT. We can bring in a lot of corporations that will work with UNT if we can get UNT to help work with them. And we can bring in service jobs up in that area, in the UNT, North UNT campus area, that are high-tech and well-paying, and then everybody can work with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Jody.
Okay. I mean, this question is really personal for me because it hits close to home. I mean, I'm a licensed master social worker. I work at below the market rate because I want to work 15 minutes from my house. So I work a job where I can get up and be at work in 15 minutes. I came here to school in 1992. I was on the 8-year plan, and, you know, I had to have affordable housing because I found myself going to have a family. So affordable housing is definitely a need to keep people here. I'm a renter, as I've told many people before. I don't own property in Denton because I can't afford it on my salary. And so I think you definitely have to bring the jobs here for people. They can get a lot of training at NCTC, but if there's not a place to take your training to, then you're definitely going to leave. I've been a commuter, and it's a horrible time waste of your day. It doesn't allow you to do the other things you want to do. It takes away time from your family. And so definitely it is bringing more jobs, but it's bringing jobs that are at the market rate for what someone with that training or degree it should earn. But then we definitely got to have places for them to live as well.
Thank you, Jody. Moving back to place number 6, we're going to start with Paul. And this question is going to be a minute question. And in interest of fairness, everyone will have their own minute question. So this is your minute question. Denton is an ambitious city. When we want to create a university, we create things like the best music school in the nation. When we want to do things like tackle the natural gas issue in our town, we do things like the first city in the state of Texas to ban fracking. When we want to go after a new energy policy, Denton is now on track by 2020 to hit 100% renewables.
Sorry. Repeat the part that was. I just want to hear the part that.
I'm just listing off these ambitious things about this town. The other one is, as a small rural community, we build one of the best, cutest, most beautiful courthouses in the entire state of Texas. So many examples of the ambition in our town. Paul, if you were to get elected in 1 minute, what's your big idea to take us into the next century?
I can only have one big idea.
One big idea. 1 minute. You got 1 minute.
I got in a minute. I can give you 2. First of all, we have another number 1 that's not that great, having the worst air quality in Texas. That's not exactly a calling card, but we could turn it into one, because you could believe that the city that had the worst air quality in Texas would have the most innovative air quality protection policies. And I think Denton could be that city. So you referenced the fracking ban. We could have the most protective gas well ordinances, but we can also do things consciously to improve air quality. You always hear political people say, well, there's nothing you can do because the winds blow from Houston and Dallas and that we're in a shallow. But it's not true that there's nothing you can do. We can increase our tree canopy. We can have vertical parks along roadways. I don't know how feasible these things are, but there are towers in China, which has even worse air quality than Denton, Texas, that actually take particulates out of the air.
Thank you very much.
I thought I could do 2 in 1 minute.
Frank, what's your big idea for Denton?
One big idea. Let's build on what we already have, and that is a great entertainment music venue, and expand that. Take a look at the fine arts building here. I think there should be a partnership, public and private, to raise that thing and bring it back as a big concert hall. Bring in more music, and then in those small ideas or small business ideas, bring in more entertainment venues so we have places for our musicians and our students to participate. I think that is something that I would like to look at. I've been talking about that because this is what we already have. There are other things that we can do and encourage more small businesses, light manufacturing to come in to build those jobs that we need. And I think those are 2 ideas, unfortunately, not one big idea, but 2 that we would like to put out there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving back to the mayoral race, I believe we're starting with Mr. Durant for this question. 2 minutes, and we're back to 2 minutes. Mr. Durant, in videos and posts recently that you've put out, you've described the atmosphere at City Hall under the leadership of Mayor Watts using terms and phrases like corruption, backroom deals, collusion, and bribery. Are those just political sound bites meant to sow distrust for an election? Or do you have actual specific examples of such illegal behavior?
No, that's not a soundbite, and I wish I had about 2 hours to discuss this. One, we have an at-will employee who was paid $90,000 when she left. For what? $3,000 was vacation pay, $90,000. But an ordinance was passed saying that if you're the city manager and you want to make a deal for under $250,000, go ahead and tell us about it later. Two, transparency. The contracts that were signed at the gas plant with Wasilla and Burns and McDonald were public record the moment they were signed. We were told there was a confidentiality agreement. The confidentiality agreement apparently nobody read, because what it said was very simply that the contracts weren't confidential, only their trade secrets and their engineering. Third, we've had a series of, whether you want to call it with DME, whether you want to call it with Parks and Rec, whether you want to call it with code enforcement, there's a series of closed-door meetings. Everyone emerges, no one says a thing, and then we go back, and about 2 or 3 weeks later, we hear a statement from the city, something to the effect that, well, nothing illegal happened, so let's just put this behind us. And we never find out what actually happened. And if there isn't any question about shutting the people out here, the staff's in the meetings, the council's in the meetings. Only people shut out are the people, to the point of the fact that they tint the windows now on the Deborah Armator memorial windows. They tint the windows so people can't even see in. So, and now, if there isn't any question about what we're talking about with collusion, remember that little thing called Project Cartoon that turned into Buc-ee's?
Time.
They're doing it again.
Time.
Project High Fly.
All right, thank you. Mr. Watts, since that was kind of directed in your direction, we'll give you 2 minutes to respond.
Well, if you look at the examples, we'll just go down the list. The signature authority for the city manager had to do with DME. So that doesn't have to do with the alleged severance agreement that he refers to. That was executed, and the city council passed a policy after that because they were unaware of that no more severance packages unless approved by city council. As far as redaction of the Wartsilla contracts, there is state law that prevents municipalities from revealing proprietary information as provided and argued by and presented by the manufacturers. So if you want to go to court, Mr. Roden, could you please...
Excuse me, let's please be respectful of folks talking. Thank you, please continue.
Sure, and as far as tinting windows, that was just another way to ensure that when we have a closed session, we have a closed session. Municipalities are allowed to go into executive session for several exceptions. I can tell you we've had a tremendous reduction in executive sessions in the last 4 years. So you asked a question about, can you show collusion? I mean, you're talking about legal terms. I didn't hear anything that he said or that anybody's brought up. These are simply, we have implemented best practices. As far as the deck and the energy center, public input was tremendous. In the last 4 years, public engagement has been over the top as far as the citizens participating. We had a 8-hour meeting during the fracking ordinance. So, Councilmember Roden, I mean, come on.
Former councilmember.
Yes, former council member. So, look, these ad hominem attacks are certainly his purview to do so. I've laid out on the blog post on Politically Denton my response to that. I'm not going to take the time to do it here. I can tell you right now the city of Denton is not corrupt. The city of Denton is not accepting bribes. The city of Denton is not breaking the law. The city of Denton certainly in the last 4 years has... Thank you.
Yeah.
You bet.
Thank
I'll
you.
respect that.
And again, I know we're in a more raucous environment than what we would be in a typical boring candidate forum, but please let them talk. And if you have comments that you want to make, you can step outside and make those to whoever you want outside. Thank you very much for participating. All right, we're going on to, where are we at? Place 5. We're starting off with Aaron Fuzzy Newquist on this question. And this is your 1-minute question. Glenn, that's for you. Same question that I just recently asked place number 6. And what is your big idea for the city of Denton?
Flying cars. I'm just kidding. Electric flying cars. No, seriously, I laid it out before. A ground-up approach to getting people trained in the skills needed to do today's work is extremely important. So I'm not going to belabor that point too much. The other thing I'd like to see us do is really get together behind our nonprofits who are doing tremendous work. Think about what Serve Denton's doing right now. What other nonprofit has brought over $2 million from outside of Denton to try to combat the problems of this community? That's the kind of stuff we need. Hey, I'll take other people's money for that kind of work any day. We could use some more of that kind of thinking. We could use some of that ingenuity. They can use our moral support, our financial support, our networking to get it done.
Time. Bud, what's your big idea for Denton?
Without belaboring, and again, it's infrastructure. No matter who you bring in or what you bring in, if you can't get the employees to the business and back home again, they aren't going to come. Plain and simple.
Thank you very much. Moving on. We're back at Jody.
Oh, no.
Big idea for Denton.
Oh, Lord, help me. Basically, a better way to get from here to there, whether that be better bicycle infrastructure, better public transportation, better roads. It is difficult to get from here to there. I recently, after 2 decades, bought myself a bicycle because I got a questionnaire from the Denton Bicycle Coalition asking me about bicycle infrastructure in the city. I'm like, I have absolutely no idea about bicycle infrastructure in the city. So I started looking around and going, okay, that road has a hill and that road has a hill. I'm not riding that. So far, I want y'all to know I have not made it out of the parking lot of my apartment, but I have a really cool cruiser bike and my helmet has cat ears on it. So you'll see me when I finally do get to riding around. But I just think we need better infrastructure to get to and from.
Anyone with money out there, big idea, buy every candidate a bicycle and ask them to ride around the town. Good job, Jody. Okay, next up, we're moving back to Deb Armentor. Your big idea.
Okay, big idea in 1 minute. So, actually, I have a number of big ideas. But one of the biggest ones actually is one that I think that points out what I think my opponent would probably agree is, my opponent seated right here to my left, is one big distinction between the two of us, and that is in our approach to growth. He talks about embracing the growth on his website. I believe we need to slow the growth. I believe that is the fiscally responsible approach to growth. Our infrastructure is not catching up, is not keeping up with our growth, and we just can't expect to keep growing and while our infrastructure catches up. Of course, growth will happen anyway, right? We can't stop it, but we need to slow it down and take care of the people we have right here, all y'all, before we talk about kind of trickle-down economics fantasies about, incentivizing big companies like Amazon to come in here and make jobs. And that's just a gamble. Thank you. Let's take care of our own.
Heading back to place 6. 2 minutes. Recently, the city spent 5 months and nearly $150,000 investigating the Denton Parks Foundation and found no wrongdoing all because of one anonymous tip from one citizen. As we're talking about ethics in our city, and there's a desire to get more ethics rules on the books, there's actually now a charter rule making that happen. How do we do it in such a way that doesn't allow for innocent types of entities like the Parks Foundation to be victim to anonymous tips? And we are starting with, who did we start with last time? Frank.
Oh, well, right. Obviously, there was a bad, if the word is mistake, but I was told that if the city council had heard that issue, it would have been resolved right away. So I think it's what happens here is communication, lack of communication, lack of insight and oversight. But if the citizens want an ethics ordinance, let's have one, and let's all abide by it. I think that's a good thing to have. It's transparent, it's accountable, but let's make sure we don't throw somebody or some by anonymous whatever it might be, anonymous report. It should be open, and it should be validated by facts and figures, and if it's a problem, we take care of it. But I think that was the issue. It was just a slow process. People weren't informed. We brought in auditors and kept on digging, and finally what happened? There was nothing there. So if we would have nipped it in the bud right away, I think we would have been very, very well off. But at the same time, we may have not had as much input into the ethics ordinance that we're seeing right now. So thank you.
Paul.
Yeah. Specifically with regard to the Parks Foundation, I think really the problem there was just that it got out at an inappropriate time. And I don't think there's anything wrong with people being able to give anonymous tips and to give those who investigate questions like that, a way to hear those issues. But that shouldn't have been public. And I don't know if we've ever figured out how that got out. I doubt anybody in city government wanted it to. But regarding the ethics ordinance in general, while we're still in this moment where it's not fully been crafted yet, I'd like to offer a little input that in some issues, I think, well, first of all, most important thing is that we get it done. I think we've come so far. The fact that even used to be controversial is still amazing to me. But so we're close to getting it done. So that's the most important. But there are some issues that are where I think I differ with my opponent on where recusal lines belong and also where kind of declaration policy belongs. In my opinion, if you are in a position to give a grant to a nonprofit that you sit on the board of, to me that's common sense that's a conflict of interest. I think that's wrong. Whereas my opponent opined that was common sense to permit that at the Denia Forum. Then in general, we talked a lot about is a $600 limit too high or too low, and I'm honestly not sure where the recusal limit is, but the simple idea that you ought to say whether you have a relationship with someone before you, I think is a very easy to adopt principle. Has anybody here ever been on jury duty? Many, right? And you have to you go through voir dire or voir dire, they call it some places, where you have to say if you've got a relationship with who's coming before you. So, if I'll just give an example. If the realtor for the Buc-ee's deal vote on that, you might say, I was appointed by the realtor for the Buc-ee's deal.
We have told the candidates, we've told the candidates in advance if they get discussed as part of the answer of the other opponent, they get 30 seconds to respond.
Well, obviously, my opponent doesn't understand the relationships and the duties of P&Z. We don't make decisions. We only review ordinances and plats and rezoning. So, Buc-ee's was by right. Okay? They had the right to do whatever they wanted. No, they did not? Well, I'm
Let
sorry.
him answer the question, please.
I had, from what I
Please,
understand,
continue on.
they bought a piece of property, it was zoned for that. Now, would have voted for the tax abatement? Probably not. I didn't agree with it, and I told my council person and others on that board that I would not do that. So I'm not sure where that was coming from, and at that point, it was ridiculous.
Thank you very much. We're moving back to the mayoral race.
Technically go back, because I was.
It is 2050.
2050.
You guys are both around, riding your bikes around town. It's 2050 in downtown Denton. What do you hope it looks like, downtown Denton? What has changed? And how do we get there starting in 2018? Who goes first? Mayor Watts.
Me? Is it you or me? Me? Yeah. Give me those three one more time.
Absolutely. It's 2050 in downtown Denton. What do you hope it looks like? What has changed? And how do we get there starting in 2018? Essentially, your long-term vision.
Sure. I think what it's going to look like is something very similar to what it looks like today in the sense of architecture, design standards, and guidelines, because that's what makes the downtown square special, is what it brings. That's what brings people to our community. But what will be different is that the sidewalks will be repaired. The streets will be such that they are functional for autonomous vehicles that will provide transportation alternatives from all over the city, where people won't have to come and park here necessarily, that they can have satellite parking lots where people can get in the autonomous vehicle, drive on our streets that are built for autonomous vehicles, and get to the square. So we won't have the parking issue. So it will be truly a pedestrian-friendly environment. So how do we get there from here? Well, we're doing it. We're in the process of replacing sidewalks. When we're doing the street infrastructure, which we're going to be talking about here in about another 2 weeks or 3 weeks on the muse streets, they call them, which are the streets that are secondary streets off the square, we need to start thinking about, because autonomous vehicles are coming. And we need to make sure that we're building our streets with the opportunity to take advantage of that technology. In fact, autonomous vehicles are already here. I think we'll have a public transportation system that if you don't want to use an autonomous vehicle, you'll be able to use that adequately through a rideshare. So I see it being similar in the sense of its architecture, its offerings, to be able to step back in time, because in 2050, you're going to be really stepping back in time when it looks like this. But it will have the technology in place through Wi-Fi, through the autonomous street, that will provide that high technology opportunity, which will reduce vehicular traffic, improve air quality, and I think provide an opportunity for people to continue to enjoy the square the way that they do now. And that is, it's a hometown feel with local businesses who are wanting people to come and just have a good time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Durantz.
Well, I remember 50 years ago when people said that the city Denton Square would still be here, there just wouldn't be any horses on it. Well, I see a very different skyline. If we build the economy that we are capable of, if we utilize our universities, if we change the models for which we have been outdated for 20 years, and in marketing and attracting business to this city, then I see a very, very different skyline. Yes, the square will still be here, and maybe a few of the storefronts will be as well. I recall that every storefront, when I first moved here in 1964, looked pretty much like the same. And if y'all will remember Evers Hardware that was on the south side, what that was. They're all gone now. And now we have a lot of difference and a lot of change to the point where we may lose our historical designation if we keep changing the square the way it's been going. So what we need to do is to expand a cultural district and preserve our heritage up there. And it's more than just repairing a sidewalk. This is talking about building codes. It's talking about making a definitive plan. Because 2 blocks off the square, you see the change that we've already had in the last 10 years. But I would project that it would probably look something like what Houston does now, in the sense that they have an old square where an old courthouse is and a couple of courts building. But you look a block off that square, it goes up 40, 50, 60 stories or more. And I think that's where we should be looking for, with building structure, with changes in our codes, and changes in our transportation, and also preservation through our cultural districts, our historical districts, and the expansion of the cultural district, which is now being proposed, which will not only encourage the local economy. I'm out of time.
Thank you. Heading to place 5 again, and I think we're back starting with Jody.
Lucky you.
Oftentimes when we talk about the inevitability of Denton's growth, oftentimes people say, but we've got to figure out how to preserve Denton's character while we grow with new people and we grow with new things and new build out and development and whatnot. So the question for you is, what is it about Denton's character that is most important to preserve with this growth, and what are your plans to do it?
What is the most that small town feel about it? And I think that's what's important to preserve. I mean, you can still walk around and find people who know your name. You can still go to community activities. There's always something to do. And so I think, as has been mentioned, I mean, you just don't want to grow too fast. You want to do smart growth. You want to do growth that fits into the character of your city, as well as, you know, preserving your downtown. So, I mean, even though Denton has grown so much lately, I mean, I still feel like it's home. And I think we're going in the right direction, but we just need to look at growth, look at what we're putting in, and just not let it grow too fast, because at some point in time, it's going to become a Denton we don't recognize anymore.
Thank you very much. Next is Deb Armentor.
So, in addition to our awesome music culture, and under that umbrella, the most important thing about Denton that we need to preserve is its people. And I believe when we're talking about preserving people, we're talking about children, young people, however you want to define that, making sure that the Denton of their future is a place where if they end up leaving Denton, it's because they've chosen to leave. I don't want anyone to feel like they have left because they can't afford to live here anymore. And right now that's happening. That's a high goal. It's a high goal. And, you know, I'll be honest, not all of that is within the city's control, but there's a lot that we can do that's in our control, and there's a lot we can do not to make it worse. And when I talk about our people, I'm talking about our poor people. I'm talking about immigrants who live here, who are Denton residents, who contribute so much to our community and our economy, who help do a lot to help keep prices low. A lot of our infrastructure has been built by people whose parents or even they themselves may not be from here, but they are Dentonites. So all over the socioeconomic spectrum, especially thinking of our youth in the future. So we need to focus our spending on public needs instead of private wants so that we can preserve the good of this city for our children. Thank you.
Mr. Newquist.
Yeah, this is an important question because, you know, Denton's a very old city, but it's also a fast growth city. And with that comes a lot of problems, a lot of challenges, and it creates quite a dichotomy of wants and needs and tradition and looking forward to the future. You know, in my mind, a lot of words just came to my head. Things that we need to preserve. What is it about Denton's character that's most important to preserve? We're creative, we're original, we're charitable, we're educated, and we're hardworking. We're forward-thinking, we're innovative. We try new things. You know, when I first got here, one of the first things I learned about through my involvement with Leadership Denton was about being 40% renewable and how out on the edge that is. that's awesome. That may not be something that I was tapped into before, but I learned that, and I thought, you know what? That's the kind of place that I want to be. And so after I did a little bit of moving around the country, this is where I brought my family back for that kind of thinking and for all those traits. So we need to make sure we preserve those things that are all different about us, because at the end of the day, we really want other people to say, how can we be more like Denton? Right? Instead of worrying so much about how can we be like somebody else, or what traits does somebody else have that we want. Well, we can just write our own book. Every day we get up and we can just lace up our skates because we're Denton, and we can write our own story by going into this every day with all of these traits. So for me, it's all about, what is it about the character? Creative, original, charitable, educated, hardworking, forward-thinking. I do think the square is going to look like that in 2050 in a lot of ways. There's other areas that we can add density in. There's also, we can go about the work of redefining our central business district to preserve this and also meet the needs of our growing city. There's 1,000 different ways we can do it, but these are kind of in our DNA, so I'd like to preserve these.
Time. Thank you very much. Mr. Voken.
The two big things have already been mentioned, UNT and TW, and particularly with UNT with the music, and the downtown area. Obviously, TW and the downtown area are very much interconnected. Now that we've got the civic park that goes between TWU and the downtown, we got some bike lanes, some bike facilities that work well. They need to be improved. But the bottom line, again, is infrastructure. And they made mention earlier, there's a substantial amount of the downtown area to the north and to the south that's in the floodplain. That needs to be taken out. Once that's taken out, you build them out of the floodplain, the developers will come. Then the city has to look at what kind of development that is. And you have to come in with mixed use. You need to have a grocery store downtown. You need to have more parks downtown. You need to have the walkability. You need to have storefronts in the apartment complexes. You need to have townhouses. One thing my wife and I are constantly talking about nowadays, now that I'm retired, is where do we really want to live? We want to live where we can walk. We want to walk to a grocery store, whether it's a corner store or a block or one that takes up a whole block. We want to be able to walk to restaurants. We don't have those facilities here per se. We don't have the townhouses. We don't have the high density. Now we have to get stuff out of the floodplain so that those developers will come in and develop that, but not the high buildings that they were talking about, but moderate high buildings where you can get the mixed use in.
Thank you. Next question is with our place 6 folks, and this one I think starts with Paul. You all ran for a reason, and you probably have some sense in your mind of what makes you distinctive from your opponent. And since you're in a 2-person race, I can ask you this question. Paul, what worries you about a Denton City Council if Frank is elected? Be nice, yes, be nice.
I'm going to try to keep it positive. Wow, I wonder if I can pause for 2 minutes. Frank's not all bad, you know? And actually, there are a lot of areas in which we overlap. I feel that there are certain areas, beyond the areas where we have overlap, there's certain areas where I have strong convictions and a great sense of purpose. And I expect to be maybe more energetic in the area of improving our quality of life in terms of our environment. That, you know, I think that the record of votes tells you something beyond the rhetoric. So I don't want to, you know, kind of go on and on. Many people have heard me talk about it, and Frank's already ready to respond. I think in that area, I think my sense of purpose is perhaps stronger. Also, I feel that the homelessness issue is a management issue that should not be addressed just with things that make us feel good because we're doing something. I think it needs to be addressed as a management issue that's sort of an indication that things aren't going well for anybody if we haven't solved that. We're not talking about an endless ocean of people. We're talking about, according to recent counts, you could argue it's higher, it's lower at any given point in time, but it's in the neighborhood of 650 people. And we ought to be able to see a plan for success that includes the full spectrum from emergency housing to transitional housing to affordable housing. But I'd like to see a plan, and I will demand a plan, that gets us all the way there with county-wide cooperation.
Same question to you, Frank. You wake up after Election Day and you find out that Paul Meltzer gets elected. What's worrying you about City Council?
With Paul on
With
it?
Paul on it.
Thank you. I will answer the question and not dwell on other things. Well, Paul is a good guy, and we've met and talked. He has some background that I had as a product manager, and I led up to more senior levels in my jobs. So I worry about people who have concepts, but yet don't have the ideas of how to execute them. And one of my paralysis in corporate America was I was the guy that got things done. I could see a big idea, and I knew how to get it done. And that's what I did with a lot of new product development and whatever. I also have a current business background in Denton, and I've worked on P&Z, so I know how that works. I know what P&Z is to do and what it's not to do. I've also built buildings and built businesses in Denton, so I had to deal with City Hall on a number of occasions, 3 in fact. And I almost took them to court on a number of issues that they wanted me to keep on doing and redoing as my buildings were being built. So I'm asking for more citizens' transparency to look at what is being developed in the city, and I had an issue with that, and I want to make sure that follows through also, is that when engineering and streets are being developed and people are building buildings here, the citizens are taking a look at the impact that it has on their neighborhoods and their lifestyles. Thank you.
Thank you. As much as I'd like to continue this game all night long, what we're going to do is
get a big idea?
Well, you'll be able to address it if you want as your final question. For the sake of time, because believe it or not, venues like this are just getting started for the evening. So following us here, the great Paul Slavens will be performing here on stage. Followed by when all of us are in bed, the Brave Boys Live Comedy Podcast will be done from here as well. So because of that, we need to start kind of wrapping things up. So we're going to go ahead and start, and everyone had a chance to draw places, so we're going to do the reverse of what they did when we started. So we're going to start with the mayor's race, and we started with Neil Durant's in the first question, so we're going to start with Chris Watts. You have 2 minutes to do your closing arguments.
I wouldn't call them closing arguments. Well, if I'm going to get blamed for everything that's gone wrong in Denton for the past 4 years, then I also want to be able to be given credit for what's gone right. And I hate to talk about a list of things and those accomplishments that we've been able to do together, but that's what I'm going to do. It's going to be boring, but I want to sort of show you. All right. Economic development. We have one of the largest capital investments, $135 million in Winco, $60 to $70 million convention center hotel. We've housed 20 homeless veterans through the Veterans Administration Assistance Housing Program. We've had a reduction in the tax rate of 7%. We've reduced utility costs, electric costs by 1%, and solid waste rates by 12%. More to come. We've created a barriers fund through United Way, through the Denton County Homelessness Leadership Team, that will provide, that people can contribute to. And I encourage you to contribute to it, because what it does is it helps bridge that gap of affordability, because you can buy down those leases. So we're doing something. We're trying all different kinds of things. Created diversity at the Economic Development Partnership Board. They didn't have a representative of the Black Chamber of Commerce or the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce on there when I got elected. They do now. Helped facilitate the Denton Together Coalition, which is a group of community leaders from all across the diverse spectrum in our community to come together to talk about issues, to plan projects, so that we can better understand one another, so that when things happen in our community that could create a possible flare-up, we have an opportunity, we have an avenue, we have a vehicle where people can come together and communicate to make sure that those things don't happen. Fire station. Partnership with Fire Station Emergency Service District in Argyle. We're providing fire coverage for the southwestern part of our city in partnership with them at a fraction of the cost to do that, which will also reduce insurance rates for Roberson Ranch. So if I'm going to get blamed for everything that's bad here, please, you all give me some credit for some of the good things and the great things that are happening in this city.
Mr. Durant's 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chris. Nobody blames you for everything. That's not even realistic. But I'll tell you what is realistic. And that is, for the past 4 years, we have had, for example, as Mr. Watts said, 8 hours of a hearing where people, one right after another, came and begged for a vote for the largest capital improvements project in the history of the city. They were told no. They asked to please allow them to vote on how it is funded. They said no. And they go out and they say that, well, everything is just fine. It's just great. And then we wake up last Sunday morning and what do we find? We have problems now in the police department. So to sit there and say everything's fine, it's all okay, it just kind of doesn't really ring true. I remember one of my friends once told me something that he said that his son was always telling him what a great kid he was. And he said he would say this with his face smeared with chocolate pudding that he had eaten out of somebody else's tray. And he'd say, your action speaks so loud or I can't hear the words you're saying. What we need to do is we have to change the culture at City Hall. It is time to wrest control from staff-driven initiatives back to the City Council, a City Council with vision. And they must open the doors and allow people to find out. I have but 30 seconds, and let me tell you what I mean. It was called Project Cartoon. It was sprung on 2 neighborhoods. It almost destroyed 2 neighborhoods. Now it's the biggest eyesore you ever saw in the world out there, but it's coming, and it was called Buc-ee's. They're doing it again. What's Project High Flyer? Well, we don't know, but the city has now received a letter from the Attorney General's office saying you can't have secret deals anymore. You can't close the door. You can't shut people out. And they still haven't released the information. So it may be nice to say, oh, everything's fine, but I think we need to address the problems and change the culture at City Hall. Thank you.
Moving on to place 5. We're going to go ahead and start with Bud Boken.
I always love to go first. What I would bring to the City Council, I've already discussed. I've worked for the city for 14 years. I've been an engineer for 38. I know the workings of the city, and I know how other cities, municipalities work. It's one thing to sit on the City Council and get a packet. You start reading the week before. I know how that packet got to the City Council. I know the filters that it's gone through to get them there. I've been told the City Council doesn't want to hear this. The City Council doesn't want to hear that. So I can ask the pertinent questions. Infrastructure, I don't think there's anybody up here that knows infrastructure better than I do, being a civil engineer. I think we need better road systems, not only the roads relative to potholes, but the roads relative to capacity. We need sidewalks. There's a lot of schools in this city that don't have any sidewalks outside the school property. The kids have to walk in the street. The elderly, ADA issues are ripe. They're left and right. There needs to be a program to help the elderly walk or use their wheelchairs to get where they want to go. You get them off a bus, and what do? They end up in the middle of a landscape. They can't get anywhere because there's no sidewalk. Also, there needs to be transparency. There needs to be greater transparency between the staff and the City Council. I've already made mention about the filter system, and there needs to be greater transparency between the City Council and the voters and the residents of the city. If you go to the website today, there's no goals, there's no way of knowing what the City Council is going to do in the next year, the next 5 years, and the next 20 years. We need to have something on the website with goals and people to have input.
Thank you very much. Mr. Aaron Fuzzy Newquist.
It's good. Thank you. Thank all of you for being here. I really do appreciate it. So, I've said before, and I hope I'm saying it for the first time to a lot of you, because I really do enjoy the opportunity to meet people for the first time. I'm running a very positive campaign about the future of Denton. I don't have a whole lot of bad things to say. I don't got a whole lot of doom and gloom. Hey, if we stumbled and made mistakes, sure. Can we get better? You betcha. We can do all of those things without having a gray cloud over us all the time. I'm very passionate about this city. I'm very passionate about the work I aim to do. I'm very passionate about bringing higher paying jobs. We talked about how we need to train people to be ready to accept those jobs when they come. And if we do a deal to bring a higher paying job to our city, the agreement's got to have teeth. It's got to include metrics for the number of jobs, the type of jobs, the amount of tax base it brings in, and we're going to hold them accountable to it. You know what? We can even go a step further, and we can talk about civic engagement and being a good corporate citizen. That you're not just going to go there, take our money, and pay us back over several years, but go and not engage with our community. We can do that. So we need to use those types of ideas and make sure our agreements have teeth. We're going to improve our infrastructure. It's going to happen. Whether it's me, somebody else that gets on the city council, improving our infrastructure is going to happen. I can tell you I know how to do it. I've worked with a lot of these players that do this type of work day in and day out. I know how to talk to them. I know how to speak their language. I know how to get the projects done. And third, and finally not least, real financial and risk management experience. Guys, I've been handling financials for 20 years. I've done business with some of Denton's biggest companies. I've done business with employers that employ over 100 people. And I also am responsible for making loans with people that understand how risk management actually works.
Thank you very much. Dr. Deb Armentor.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I actually happen to have lots of financial experience too on the Public Utility Board. I've made decisions, said yes, and also said no to a number of big expenditures. I've been the director of one of the biggest undergraduate programs at the University of North Texas, the English department. So I know risk management from the public perspective, which is of course very different than from in the private sector. I want to talk a little bit about positivity. I'm a very positive person, and it's funny. The last time I ran 2 years ago, I ran on a campaign for reforms. I wanted a new city manager. I didn't like the old one. I thought he was not doing well by the city. I made no secret of that. I wanted us to have an internal auditor. I thought that contracting out for external auditing wasn't enough. I wanted an ethics ordinance. Now, the funny thing about that was that may have sounded negative, but now that those things have happened, now I can run a positive campaign and say, hey, I was involved from the grassroots in helping to grow those ideas up. And those positive ideas began with pointing out something that wasn't working right. So I'm really glad to be able to run a positive campaign now, but it does take pointing out those problems if you want to have something that you're proud of. I wanted to say a little something when Mr. Durant's mentioned the Deb Armentar windows, what that was about. There was a DME closed meeting. This was before I got on the Public Utility Board. A council closed meeting about DME, and the reporter from the Denton Record Chronicle was there. I happened to be there too. And I just stood up and I just kind of went and peeked in those blinds. And what I saw, I just wanted to see people's faces to see if they were happy or sad or mad or what. And I saw a slide on the wall. I went and told the Denton Record Chronicle because I know they would tell the public. And that's what I'm all about, getting information to the public. I'm here for you. Thank you.
Jody was brave enough to kick things off for place 5, so she gets to bat cleanup.
Finish this up. Thank you to my posse over there. I'm not a public speaker. You have probably figured that out here tonight. It scares me to death, and every single one of you scares me to death. Yeah, completely and totally. But the thing is when I do something, I am totally invested in it, and I do it extremely well. Like, I speak to a group of social work students tomorrow, and I will have that down in 10 minutes flat because I know it, I'm educated about it, and I have my notes in front of me. I'm a visual learner, so these kind of forums are very hard for me. But as I've said before, I kind of run a campaign of love and kindness. Because the thing is, with love and kindness, you build mutual trust and respect. You build mutual trust and respect, you build consensus. You build consensus, you solve problems. And problem solving is what it's all about. So, and as a social worker, I live my life by the 6 core values that's in the preamble to the Code of Ethics of the National Association of Social Workers. And that is, I got my notes here: service, social justice for all, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, the importance of human relationships, integrity, and competence. I embody each and every one of them. I would bring that to City Council. I may not be able to articulate that as clearly as some of my other people up here, but I would work for you day by day, always be available, and I hope you see that. Thank you.
I have to point out, we had a chance to interview each of these candidates. Jody, talking about her youngin' days in Denton, said she used to listen to Slobberbone back when she was in college, and you might recognize someone from the booth back there, Mr. Brent Best, running sound. Connect. All right, place 6. We're going to start with Paul.
Closing statements.
Closing statements.
Well, what a pleasure to be with you all. For those of you who haven't met personally, I didn't get a real chance to introduce myself. Son of a hardworking union man, managed to get into Dartmouth and get my MBA. And I know not everyone thinks having a business career is a good thing, but you're likely to have someone with that background in place 6. And contrary to what you heard before, got a few things done. There's probably about $1 billion a year in products that are sold that I innovated or relaunched or worked on in some way. But I also managed to get out of that by age 50 and dedicate myself to community service. And I am here for you. I did learn a few things along the way. I learned how to work with big budgets. I learned how to work with people of many different backgrounds who wanted to, not necessarily who wanted to help achieve what I wanted to achieve. So I learned to listen and build consensus. And I learned to set long-term goals for companies over many years and reach them. I'll just give a simple example of how that might apply here. I've been hearing about the roads for at least 10 years, and I've never been to a city council meeting, correct me if I'm wrong, where someone has laid out the plan where we get to a steady state and most of the roads are in good repair most of the time. Just let's even see the plan. So, that's a kind of perspective that I would hope to bring. At this moment, we're facing a choice. Growth is coming fast upon us. We can either choose the status quo, special interest driven way of just letting development happen willy-nilly and let ourselves become unrecognizable, or we can preserve the things that make Denton special, enhance them so that as we grow, we get better, not just bigger. I ask for your support and I ask for your vote.
You have a question?
I just want to make sure I understood the question, so it's been a while since it was asked.
Yeah, it's just your closing statement, so whatever you want to say, Frank. Frank Dudowitz, 2 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, I'm not a politician. I don't propose to be one. I'm a business guy. I've been in Denton for 17 years building a successful business, and we are continuing to grow. We got the Small Business of the Year award last year. And my team of 50 employees and 4 great managers and a general manager, who's my son-in-law, will be taking over that business here as part of my succession plan so I can devote my full time to the citizens of Denton. Looking at Denton, we've seen so many changes, and it's going to change again, but I want to make sure that we plan strategically for that growth. It's coming, as has already been said. But in that growth, we want to make sure we have the right infrastructure put in place ahead of time so that we're not struggling like we have been to catch up with roads and sewers and infrastructure. So that has to be put in place and thought about. There is a 2030 plan, and right now that plan in its development is already out of date. So we need to re-energize that process to make sure that we're growing correctly. I want to protect neighborhoods in this process. We have some great neighborhoods. And in place 6 and place 5, we represent everybody. And I'm unique in that I have my businesses in each one of those, it's 3 businesses, 3 districts, and I live in the 4th. And I've been talking to a lot of people, and we are eclectic. What goes on in District 3 and Ropes and Ranch is a lot different than what goes on and what interests people in District 2. And 1 is different from 3 and 4. So what we would do is add another layer to your council person to take your interest in place and lay it over your particular council person. One of the things that I learned while I was on P&Z, when things that came to us, there was very little, if none, citizens' oversight on planning and engineering. When they put a road in, they put a curb cut in, they did something, it was because they could. And nobody sat back and said, does this make any common sense, what you're doing? And Bonnie Bray, and I can get into that for a whole nother hour when I looked at that plan, and they cut off entrances to a shopping center.
Time.
That was quick.
It is quick. Well, I want to thank everyone here who showed up to take part. In this forum, we certainly want to thank Dan Silverleaf. Please tip your bartenders generously before you leave here tonight. But I hope you saw here tonight, we have 8 people up here on stage who put themselves out there because they love this city. And as you've seen, they've got different ideas of what it means to make this city a better place. Sometimes they agree, sometimes they differ, but they all have this shared vision for making Denton a better place. Let's please give them one last round of applause for coming up here today.
Thanks to our moderators. Good job, moderating.
And one final thing, Glenn and I had the great fortune to sit down with each of these folks for about a 30-minute conversation. That's most of them, except for Place 5, which will be released tomorrow, is up. Search for the Politically Denton podcast. You can hear more long-form answers to a lot of these questions. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Well, thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to check out DentonRadio.com for new Denton artists and where they're playing next. While you're surfing the internet, make sure you check out our friends Classic of Denton at ClassicofDenton.com.